Morning, everybody. Today we're having this Oncology Data Advisor interview in honor of World Breast Cancer Research Day, which is on August 18th this year. So I'm joined by our editorial board member, Megan Claire Chase, as well as Dr. Connie Visovsky, who is here to tell us some more about her work in the breast cancer research space. Thank you both so much for coming on today.
Thank you. My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Kira. So I am Megan Claire Chase, but also known as Warrior Megzi in the cancer space. I'm an 8-year invasive lobular breast cancer survivor, patient advocate, and writer, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I am so thrilled to be talking with you today, Connie, for World Breast Cancer Research Day. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your passion for breast cancer research?
Sure. So I have been a nurse practitioner in the breast cancer area for many, many years. And I got my PhD. I was really interested in neuropathy. So, chemotherapy-induced neuropathy, which is such a chronic problem in the breast cancer population. And long before anybody began to really study this, I was really interested in the impact on physical functioning. So my passion is helping women to live with the sequelae of cancer treatment. Yes, we want women to be cured. We want them to have long lives, but we know that we leave some long-lasting effects that impact their quality of life, their ability to function in their day-to-day roles. And for women, they have a unique experience with breast cancer in that many women are not only homemakers and caring for their families, but they have concerns about their small children. They have concerns about going back to work and their ability to keep up with their pace before. So those things really fueled my passion for helping women with breast cancer.
As someone who has been through it, and I actually had a really severe reaction to one of my chemos. I had 16 rounds of chemo, the ACT, and in the first um, treatment, in the first 15 minutes of that particular treatment, it took a long time for me to be able to verbalize what it felt like, but it was like a current running from head to toe, and I felt my nerves dying.
Mm.
And no one expected me to have such a severe reaction
Mhm.
to it. I was told maybe by the 8th to 10th treatment, I might feel a little tingling or numbness in my hands and feet. And it happened so suddenly. And I would love to know, like, what else have you done or what have you discovered with
Mhm.
this side effect? And, we able to tell who's more susceptible to it?
Oh, that is such a good question. You know, the work in genetics in neuropathy is really still in its infancy. So there have been identified certain SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, so changes in the genes that make some people more or less susceptible. Now, we know, for instance, that when we give neurotoxic chemotherapy to people with a particular genetic disorder called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is a deformed foot, hereditarily deformed foot, that we could actually paralyze those people, because they have that genetic propensity. We don't know as much about the general population, but I wonder if there are genetic variants, right? Because
Hmm.
what your experience is really out of the norm, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So maybe there's a genetic variance that we don't know. We don't know if it's tied to race. We don't know if it's tied to things like body mass or any kind of other patterns in the body. So that's still in its infancy. So what puts women more at risk? Yes, there are things that have been identified. One is age. Everything goes to heck in a handbasket, when you're older. So, there is age is one thing. Your body mass index, so your weight. And these are things we can't control our age, right? We can hardly control our genes. We can to some extent through lifestyle, but we can control things about our lifestyle that help us. So maintaining a ideal body weight is really helpful. We also know that if you have any kind of comorbidities, like diabetes, diabetes causes neuropathy. If you have HIV and you're unfortunate enough to get a cancer that requires neurotoxic drugs, because we know these drugs are toxic to the nervous system, And those comorbidities actually cause neuropathy. HIV drugs cause neuropathy. So if you're unfortunate enough to have those, and then we give you neuropathy on top of that with, so that's a problem. And what we fail to do in the clinic and in our scientific practice is to assess people at baseline. So nobody asked you when you came in, do you have diabetes? Do you have numbness and tingling in your hands and feet already? I actually ran a neuropathy clinic, a free clinic here in Tampa called Care Tampa Bay for 4 years with my colleague, Cindy Tofthagen, who's at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville now. And she also studies neuropathy. And she and I found that 56% of the patients we saw, while we were interested in particularly in chemotherapy-induced neuropathy, most of the patients had what we call idiopathic neuropathy of no known cause. They didn't have any of the usual suspect diseases. They didn't have a cancer or treatment from cancer, but they had neuropathy from who knows what. And so that's a very interesting finding.
And for some of us, before we got our cancer diagnosis, and especially
Mhm,
those of us that had estrogen positive,
mhm,
progesterone positive cancers, for a lot of us, one of our symptoms, or I should say specifically my symptom,
mhm.
was gaining weight. I didn't realize that my hormones were, going insane. But I knew I was someone who grew up very fit and in shape, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, what is happening here? And so, it's like I don't want anyone to feel shame if they, ended up gaining weight as one of their symptoms,
Mhm.
and then they get this particular chemo when, something was going on internally that they couldn't identify, and try and lose that weight.
You're absolutely right. Women with breast cancer undergoing treatment gain weight. It may be tied more to hormone positive disease, but in general, women tend to gain weight. And if you come into breast cancer already heavy, this is tied to a worse prognosis. So it's in your best interest to try to keep the weight off. Maybe you can't do it during cancer treatment. There's so many other things going on, so many medical appointments, so many things that are you deal with treatment, nausea, vomiting, taste
Right.
changes, etc., fatigue, that maybe you tend to that after your treatment is over. But becoming more physically active, even if it's just walking, there are recommendations for women with breast cancer, and it's really like the general population, 150 minutes a week, moderate to, more intense, vigorous intensity. So that means, strolling in the mall isn't going to do it. You really have to be walking to where you can hold a conversation, but you're a little bit out of breath.
Hmm.
So doing things like yoga, things that challenge your body, where you use your own body weight, things like walking, running, tennis. I mean, things that really going to get your heart rate up are really helpful. And of course, being mindful of the diet. So, we also know there's a lot of investigation now going on with the ketogenic diet, and it's tied to certain diseases and where it helps certain diseases. So that's one thing people are trying as well. And does the low carb diet help them lose weight better, keep their blood sugar under control? Because once you are in treatment, you get those um, you get those corticosteroids to control nausea, which
Right.
actually make you eat more
Yes.
and gain weight. And so, so those are kinds of things that you have to be very, very mindful of as you're going through treatment. And I think we really lack something that I see in cardiac rehab. So you have a heart attack, you spend 3 months in cardiac rehab, right? You're on the treadmill, excuse me, 3 times a week. You go someplace, someone's watching you, someone's taking care of you. We lack that cancer rehabilitation strategy.
Yes.
And so that's really an important thing that if you're a patient advocate yourself, that we need to be advocating, and I have advocated in my lifetime for that kind of post-cancer treatment. There've been a lot of studies of cancer and exercise. We know how beneficial it is. So I would really encourage women to become more active, even if you were never active beforehand.
Yeah, it can be tough when you're someone who really never had to work at it, so to speak,
Mhm.
and figure out like where to start. And I remember, oh gosh, it was like a couple of years ago, I was talking with another doctor, and I love how she coined it. She said exercise snacks, because as you try to build up, right? Like you
Mhm.
got to start from somewhere and
Exactly.
build that up. And I just loved how she termed that, like it's like an exercise snack when you're taking a quick break, from your meetings, like stand up. Like any type of movement is better than no movement.
Absolutely. And I would say I coined myself as a runner, but I'm really not really a runner. I'm really like beginner runner. But when you start running, you can't run a mile. Heck, you can't run 2/10 of a mile. So you have to start somewhere. You have to run a minute, walk a few minutes, run another minute. So this is how we have to build ourselves up. And anything that sets you back, you get a respiratory infection, you have an injury, you again have to build up that endurance because you become deconditioned. We know that if we took a swimmer like Michael Phelps and put him to bed for 10 days, he would undergo a kind of muscular interference with his muscular protein synthesis that he would have muscle atrophy. So imagine us who are nowhere in the shape of Michael Phelps or other Olympians. We put ourselves to bed, so having that fatigue during
Mhm.
treatment and even post treatment, and we, put ourselves to rest is probably one of the worst things we can do for ourselves, even though it's very challenging. I get it. It's very challenging. It's challenging to exercise when we feel good. Never
Right.
mind when we don't feel good.
I'm wondering, can you talk to us about your research and um, about the side effect, and weren't you working on something with the National Cancer
Yes,
Institute?
I
And
am.
yeah, if you
We
could tell us
wrapped
those
up.
results or what you discovered.
Well, we've just wrapped up our 5-year study. So we don't have the final results because we just collected the last data from the last patient the first week of August.
Wow.
But we have about 122 patients, women in the study, and we randomized them to a resistance, gait, and balance exercise intervention and a control intervention, which is education. So to balance the attention between the two groups, which is a basic scientific principle. Now, women who were in the control group who wanted to be in the exercise group, we give them the exercises after the 16-week program. So it's 16 weeks. We give them an individualized prescription of exercises that challenge your gait and balance, because to improve your gait and balance, you have to challenge it and to increase the muscles of your lower body. Now, why did we choose that? Well, again, trying to be focused and trying to not overburden women who already have a burden. So they're finished with their breast cancer treatment, anywhere from 6 months on to years. And we have women in our study who've had persistent chemotherapy-induced neuropathy for 5 years, 7 years, and some just 6 months or a year after treatment, right? And so they haven't found anything in the regular medical space to help them. So they really were interested in this. And plus, this is something you can do for yourself. So we give them a resistance exercise band. We teach them the exercises. We have a YouTube link to our, exercises where our physical therapist who's on in the study developed these specifically to target the lower extremities because that's what keeps women active. And that's what keeps us able to do our daily activities. Without your lower extremity muscles, you can't go shopping, you can't get to your work, you can't climb stairs, you can't, take care of your children, you can't make meals, all of those things. So what we found in that program is that women who had, first of all, we were interested in physical functioning. Okay, so we'll say we were interested also in falls because I noticed as a nurse practitioner, my patients had a gait that wasn't quite steady. So they became a little ataxic, they little side to side motion. If they had any kind of joint problems, like they had, arthritis in their knees or something like that, that became more exacerbated. So what we noted was that if you had and reported a near fall the month before, and we asked this question every time when they first entered the study at 4, 8, 12, and 16 weeks, you were more likely to have a future fall that can cause you an injury. So we very, very focused on improving physical function. We have data that right now, as I said, we don't have the final results, but I'll tell you, we have a lot of anecdotal data from patients. For instance, we had one patient who was an older lady who averaged, and she had an Apple Watch, 300 steps a day. She went from 300 steps to 3,000 steps a day in our
Wow.
program. So tremendously improved her physical function because at 300 steps a day, you can't leave your house, right?
Yeah. Right.
So to 3,000 steps a day. We have patients who reported to us their neuropathy completely disappeared. And of course, we're going to have patients that, it didn't make much of a difference. And, but we'll see with the final results. We found that we also can improve the gait, balance, and muscle strength among the women who were the worst affected. So if you had a walker, a cane, that you got the best results. So maybe in a future study, we should target the people who need it the most. We put everybody who had neuropathy of a level of like 3 or greater into the study. But maybe we should target, be more targeted in who we put into a future study because they seem to have the greatest gains. And maybe, as I mentioned earlier, we don't do a clinical assessment before you begin your chemotherapy, right? But
Hmm.
if we did such a thing, then we would know maybe where you stood at baseline and where you might go, and we might start you earlier in some kind of exercise program. Another thing we found out is that women also wanted something for the upper extremities, which kind of surprised me. I know I could see that if you were a concert pianist or something like that, the tingling and numbness in your hands or whatever would bother you. But it seemed to like women put together, this is really helping my lower extremities. I wonder if there's something that can help my upper extremities. So in a future study, we had thought about that as well.
I can tell you, yes, please. Please do that. Because even as a writer and just typing or even holding a pen,
Hmm.
um, like it could be really challenging. And even putting in earrings, buttoning a shirt, like it took a
Hmm.
while for me to be able to do that in a timely fashion. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I think holding a glass. There's so many things that you do with your hands that you're just totally not thinking about.
Exactly. Women reported to us that they were washing dishes in the sink and they couldn't hold on to the glass or cup and it would fall and break. So
Yeah.
that made me very mindful of not only the lower extremities, but the upper as well. And not that I didn't know this happened, but I was trying to say, okay, what can we do for these women without burdening them too much? But they really wanted something for the hands as well.
I'd love to know in that research, what was the age range and were they still in treatment or were they all in survivorship?
They were all in survivorship. They had to be out of their chemotherapy treatment 6 months or more. And the mean age was 65. And the reason for that is we were particularly targeting women who had persistent neuropathy. And in the scientific literature, we think about persistent neuropathy as being someone who has neuropathy 3 months or greater after their treatment, because we know you get those taxanes. You had ACT, so the
Hmm.
T is for the taxanes last. And we know that the taxanes have what we call a coasting effect. So your neuropathy, where you think, okay, I'm done now, this is going to get better, it actually gets worse sometimes over those 3 months because of that coasting effect. And that lasts 3 months. So at the 3 month level, we should think that would get better. But we actually had women who didn't improve at all, got worse. And so we targeted women with persistent neuropathy and who were out of treatment. So naturally, our sample is a little bit older. But we did have women who were 55, 53, in their late 30s, but they weren't the propensity of our sample.
Mm. So I'll just say, as someone who was diagnosed under 40, don't forget about the adolescent and young adult community because it just I think one of the big things that shocked me going through breast cancer and the treatments, and I really suffered from, as my oncologist said, the mother load of side effects all at once,
Hmm.
is, you know, it's internally like aged us. Like we don't, you know, I know I look, I think I look young on the outside, but internally, I literally feel like I'm in my 80s. And that struggle and that mind shift, like it really
Mhm.
plays with you mentally when
Yes,
you're getting out using a cane. And I actually have a permanent handicap sign. And so when I get out of the car looking like how I do, I've been yelled at, but sometimes the numbness goes all the way up my leg and I might fall over, and I'm wondering, what were the patients that were part of this study, the participants in this study, did any of them like experience not only the nerve damage, but like would the numbness go up their legs? Did that cause the
absolutely.
falls?
Absolutely. We do, for the study, we measured many things in a lab. And it had to be done in a lab because let me tell you, gait and balance and muscle strength has not been scientifically quantified. As many women as have breast cancer, we really haven't done that. So
Really?
people will use self-report or, things like, or scales, but we actually put women on a gait right mat. So that mat has internal sensors embedded in it, and we put sensors around their waist, their knees, their calves, their ankles, and their foot so that we captured their exact gait as they were walking across and back. The second thing we did was use a isometric dynamometer. So you sit in like almost looks like a dental chair, I think, and it could be pushed back. But we strap you in and we ask you to push, push, push as hard as you can. So we got strength of the hip, the knees, the ankle, and the foot, and so that we can isolate where are the women and what's being most affected. And I can tell you what that is: the plantar flexors. And so you would think, well, because all of those areas help you walk: your hips, your knees, your ankle, your foot. And so if you've ever done a chair raise where you put your hands on the back of the chair
Hmm.
and you lift your heels up, that's a great exercise to strengthen the plantar flexors.
Ooh.
So we found those very effective. We also did nerve conduction testing. So we had a neurologist that would come to our lab and do the nerve conduction test. All of these women had neuropathy. They all had sensory, and some of them had sensory and motor neuropathy. So you probably have both from what
Yes.
you're exhibiting,
Yes.
because the nerve conduction tests only give us the information on the large nerve fibers. We also wanted information on small nerve fibers. So, on a subset of patients, we did a small punch biopsy above the ankle to count nerve fibers, and that gives us the small fiber information on pain and sense and sensation and things like that. So we just finished, so we don't have the exact data from that yet. Does that correlate? Whatever, but it's very hard to regrow nerves. You must know that for the persistent nature of the way this is feeling. But we are very much thinking, and the results from our study are leading us to believe, at least the preliminary results, that if you bring blood flow to the peripheral nerves through exercise, you increase the ability of the peripheral nerve cells to produce energy from the mitochondria. All your cells have mitochondria, right? That produces your energy for the cellular processes. And then we know when you get the taxanes, particularly, there's been animal studies, rat studies that have shown this, that the actual vessels that feed the peripheral nerves become smaller. And so we know those effects. So if we give you exercise and you can dilate those vessels and bring more blood flow there, that should help the symptoms. And indeed, that's what we're finding. And so it's very important to have both aerobic and some resistance exercise. Aerobic for your cardiovascular and bringing, blood flow, but also the resistance exercise for building muscle strength. So those are what we found out in terms of our physical measures. We also are finding that women absolutely have altered gait when they come to us. Absolutely. And some more altered than others, obviously.
Right.
Certainly, not ideal muscle strength. Now, we have women in the study who were exercisers. So they were runners, or they were women who went to Orange Theory or someplace like that, and were exercising regularly. So did they have better muscle strength than others? Yes, they did. But again, the women who had the worst seemed to improve the most.
I mean, that just gives me hope, and I feel like any other patients and survivors who listen to this, it gives you hope, because for a while I was just like, I don't know what to do, and I had a very severe fall, which really scared me.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually started doing stimulations, and
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, with a chiropractor. And what shocked me is that he said that he can help with chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy, and then there was like diabetic neuropathy, and I am not a diabetic, and so I was intrigued by that. So I went to him, and it was funny. He thought I was a researcher because of the questions I was asking, and I was telling him, "Here's what I've experienced," and it actually did help. Like you said, I didn't realize the lack of blood flow, that circulation. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that that's what was happening, and so now I can say, I can walk. I only park in the handicap
Mm-hmm.
parking lot on a really bad like pain day, because I deal with some other major side effects from my chemo treatments and radiation and surgeries. And just to, like you said, the gait, I didn't even realize how far off I was, how wobbly I
Mm-hmm.
was, and how much I become stronger, but I still don't walk as gracefully as I used to. I will say that.
But you have made great strides, and you're right about the falls. Now, you're a young woman, but in you think about women who are 65 or older, you fall and break your hip. That you has a high mortality rate, 50% mortality rate that's tied to mortality. So we don't want women to fall, absolutely. And also the kind of footwear you wear is very important. You probably figured out you can't wear flip-flops, or you
Right.
shouldn't anyway. Because your heel can go off, and that you make it much easier to fall. You need to have hand grips in your shower, you need to tack your rugs down. There's so many things in terms of home safety that we don't even tell patients well enough to help them to live a safer life in their
Such a good
daily
point.
lives.
Yeah. What would you say, as we start to wrap up here, what would you say to the breast cancer community and those of us who are patient advocates? What is it that we can help share in our communities?
Well, I think when you are undergoing treatment, you have, and maybe you experience this, a nurse navigator, right?
Yeah.
Once that treatment stops and you're done, your navigation stops. So even when you get an advanced breast cancer, like a metastatic breast cancer, there's no nurse, there's nobody to navigate you. So it's really be great if the advocates can help others, and you probably do, navigate this disease, and to understand that you advocate too for yourself, what you need, and asking all the right questions, dietary advice, exercise advice, referrals. Because if that's not offered to you, honestly, you have to seek it yourself. We would hope that our care facilities would offer these things to patients, but also help for their spirit, their emotional help, to help them navigate these changes where you said, well, I feel like an 80-year-old in a 40-year-old body. That is absolutely true. And so there's no chronic disease that you can have. And cancer is a chronic disease now, that where you have exacerbations and remissions and could be, cured forever, or you can have this kind of roller coaster ride of cancer. So we have to help people navigate that. I would tell women to take charge of your life. And we know now that your body mass is important, your strength is important, your spirit is important. And so we want you to conquer all of those areas. And I think of those women as warriors. In fact, one of my songs that, I hear, and I think it was Carrie Underwood who did it with Ludacris, maybe. It's called The Champion. I'm the Champion. And I always think about that when I think about my patients. And I think about them being the champions of their life.
Mm, the champions of your life. I love that. I love it. Well, Connie, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your time, your expertise, your insights. You're leaving me feeling quite hopeful. And it's just another reminder that, the essence of you will not change. The essence of you is still there, and to really be mindful of treating the whole person. And And that's why I feel like these kind of conversations are so helpful, and it really helps give me the type of information to share with the community and say, hey, this is being researched. There's a lot going on, and I can't wait to follow up once you actually go through all of the results and let us know what you find out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so excited to talk with you, and there is hope.